So I'm really excited to be here, and first of all, I just wanted to say terrific to be in Adelaide, and thank you so much to the Better Boards conference and the team to give me the chance to come and speak to you today about a topic that I'm very passionate about and that I work in. And I'll get close to this theme as the day progresses, but it's sort of two topics, but I'm going to call it one topic. And we'll talk a bit about integration and convergence as the day goes on. As I was putting my slides together over the past couple of months and frenetically over the past week to get it looking hopefully a bit better than it was before, I started to have a freak out about trying to touch two subjects and words that were so hard to define: strategy and social impact. Just the mere mention of these words can send people into fear with a mixed look of apprehension and excitedness when they come up in conversation. So could I ask for a show of hands, who here thinks they've got a good definition for strategy? Yep, we've got one or two, so that's not bad out of a couple of hundred. And social impact, anyone want to tackle that? We've got one. All right, okay, good. We're all in agreement. Very difficult to define. But continuing on from a theme addressed earlier, I think simplicity is the order of the day. And I'll be relying on the sagely advice of Chinese scholar Lao Tzu, who says, all things have their origin in that which is easy, and great things in that which is small. And really what I want to try and do for you today is to break down some of the difficulties around explaining strategy and social impact in practice and give you some good practical advice about how you can work these key concepts really effectively into the way you run your organisations without getting too lost in complex frameworks or strategies, which would just not be kind after lunch. So the outline of the day, I'd like to just do definitions first, and I'll define strategy and social impact. We'll do a bit of discussion of my observations and learnings from the field, and then we'll get to integration, where these subjects really come together. And finally, I'd like to take a look at some of the exciting things coming in the space of strategy and social impact, where we see that they're no longer disparate subjects at all. They actually converge and can be seen as one. And yeah, I won't give too much more away on that, so I was going to talk a bit more about that, but maybe later. So in deciding what the best definition for strategy was in this talk, I grappled long and hard. I went back to Michael Porter, stakeholder theory, Ivan Mitrov, and I even stopped by Simon Sinek, who gives the most millennial-friendly definition vis-a-vis the golden circles. But I thought, really, what was fascinating to me is I had to go back 2,000 years to get a definition that I felt comfortable with. And for me, the knowledge of the ancients is always, it's so impressive how it stands the test of time, predates the modern notion of the organisation, but there's much we can learn. And it was Seneca who said, if one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favourable. So how do we break this down, and how does this have meaning for us in the complex world of strategy and navigating the hard waters of the organisation? Well, if you think about it, there's the ship, there's the port, and there's the wind and the water. And so the ship is the organisation, the port is where you're headed. It can be a vague or concrete destination, and utilising your natural and surrounding environment and resources to get there is key. So how do you harness the wind and the sea and the currents to get your ship where it's going? And that has definitely been the most powerful way of thinking about strategy for me. Now, foundationally, I think there's a couple of key things to tick off on when you're considering strategy and how to deliver strategy effectively. You need to have a clear purpose, and Sinek talks very much about this, and I think purpose being, what is the reason we are all here, our why? What is our higher order goal or objective? You need to have an articulated impact. There's a lot of discussion of impact at board level and also organisational level, but I think the proof is in the pudding. So what do we see every day? It's got to be evidence-based. We need to have science and data backing up why we do what we do in strategy as well. What are we basing our decisions on? And it has to be stakeholder consulted. And importantly, with stakeholder consultation, I'll be talking to you today not just about the ticking the box of stakeholders later in the piece, but very early on, starting those discussions with your stakeholders as you formulate strategy. And in the strategy formulation stage rather than the end of consultation stage. So not-for-profit strategy, we started with a broader definition of strategy from the ancients, thank you Seneca, And now we're going to talk a little bit about the complexities of not-for-profit strategy. So it's not as simple when we layer on the sort of current complexities of running a not-for-profit, and you're thinking a bit about how do we fulfill our social purpose, but how do we do so in a financially sustainable manner? If you can't do it financially sustainably, your ship is literally sinking and there's no purpose, there's no port to which you can call home. So ticking off the financial sustainability is key, but how do you fulfill your social purpose? And so it's worth thinking a little bit about what are the expectations of our stakeholders that tie directly into financial sustainability. And what I'm seeing in my line of work is stakeholders such as funders in particular, philanthropy, government, and related bodies are looking very closely at quality of outcomes, not just quantity of program data. It's a distinct change. We're in a new sort of environment where you used to be able to get by doing your measurement and evaluation and saying, we're running more programs now, so we're doing better. It doesn't cut the mustard anymore. It's a changed environment, and people want to know why you're being more effective and how, not just that the volume is increased. So in that sense, if you can get closer to key quality metrics about how you're doing impact, you're going to be a lot closer to both financial sustainability, but also to fulfilling your social purpose in a meaningful way. Now, key to this way of thinking is also how we think about all the stakeholders involved in how we do strategy. And this is what we call stakeholder-oriented theory or strategy. And it emerged in the 80s, defined by Ivan Mitrov. And it asks us to think deeply, not just about how we can generate the most volume of services or revenue based on what we do, but to think about how we meet the expectations of our stakeholders to generate stakeholder value for the organisation. And the value that the organisation has will be a sum of the parts of the stakeholder value from each of these parties. So we're thinking about how do we do the most that we can to satisfy funders, our clients, and often overlooked part, our people, our key internal stakeholder. So it's always looking to people first before clients, because they're the people who are going to serve your clients. So if you don't have happy people who can see your impact and understand the strategy, you're not going to have happy clients and satisfied clients. So key. Finally, community. What does the community ask from your organisation? It's a lot more useful if you think about the community as a separate stakeholder that has legitimate questions for your organisation. It might not be an actual tangible person, but think about the community groups that you work with and what would they ask of your board and of yourselves in delivering really good strategy and outcomes. And I think if you can do all of this early, you're asking the right questions and on the way to much more rounded strategy. Now, this really kept me up at night. What is a good definition of social impact? I searched everywhere. I looked at a couple of Wharton Business School definitions. I looked at Stanford Social Innovation Review. Every definition that I found was concerned chiefly with how to measure social impact as an end product and not as an integrated part of the strategy-making process. So it disappointed me so much that I resorted to my own way, and I've created this definition that I think really talks in reality about what the practice of doing good social impact involves. So it's an approach to creating, measuring and reporting on the change we want to see in clients and the community. So you'll see you can measure and report, and that is a discipline in itself, social impact measurement, but to create with social impact in mind is an entirely different thing. And I'll illustrate why that's valuable and important. So social impact, another way to think about it is you're taking people on a journey. It's a change narrative. So what are you changing? Who are the people involved? It's the what, the why, to whom and how. So who is creating the change? What is the change? Why is there change? Who is experiencing the change? And how has that happened? A simple way to think about this is, how does the sausage machine work? So what goes in and what comes out, but what are all the things in between and how do we tell that story effectively? And I think what we're doing in the space today is we're moving from a pretty static, monochromatic picture of what change is, on a page, to something that's far more textured and nuanced and tells a real story of the journey that your stakeholders go on and how their lives improve, their well-being and quality of life improves as a result of delivering on the strategy and creating better social outcomes. What I was alluding to earlier, I wanted to sort of discuss an example of how I've seen things are done with a lot of my clients in the not-for-profit space. A simple way of thinking might be that you've got 7,000 clients who are entering your program throughout the year. You know that 15% are called culturally and linguistically diverse. You've got maybe 10% LGBTI, and next year you plan to have 8,000 clients passing through your service. So I've seen this time and time again, and this is something that government would say, look, this is good, we can see the program's growing, therefore it's working. But I think that logic is no longer effective and in practice. And I think what you see a lot more of is good practices around sort of saying, we've had 7,000 clients pass through a program. We know that we've got 15% called, 10% LGBTI. We saw average subjective wellbeing increase by 6% across all participants, with 4% improvement in the called group and 0% change in our LGBTI cohort. So what can we learn from this to make better strategy? Our program is not working for our LGBTI participants. So we need to change, we need to iterate. The good thing about doing social impact work this way is it's about generating insights that help you be better. It's strategic innovation. It's not something that you see as the end process. It's really about discovery and asking the right questions and refining things so they make sense for each of your clients and stakeholders. So making the journey really work for everyone. So which cake is better? Don't all answer at once, it's fine. It's definitely the one on the right. And the reason is, well, technically more icing, that's the good stuff. But just to expand a little bit, cake one is the approach where you say, we've done a lot of the hard work early, but we forgot about social impact. So we'll just do a social return on investment at the end. We'll slap that on, we'll get it verified, and off to the races. We're a great organisation that has tremendous social impact. We see that often. But that's just the icing on the cake. You'll find when this happens, a lot of the people in the organisation don't understand it or know about it. The community doesn't really get why it's been done, and funders are a bit curious as well. The second cake is about social impact woven into all levels of the organisation and its foundations. There's depth, so social impact is a conversation that happens throughout the organisation. It supports strategy, it doesn't hinder it or sit at the end of it. And it supports learning and continuous improvement and innovation in how we do strategy and create change, positive change for our clients. So I'll urge you, and by the end of this talk, hopefully I've made the case that cake 2 is definitely the cake you want to be and your organisation wants to be, and don't settle for cake 1. So what's the winning formula in creating the most amount of social impact that you can in such a complex space? Well, I put it to you that it's actually a lot simpler than it seems. You need a strategic approach that is outcomes focused from the beginning. It's figuring out what those outcomes are that's the really hard part and the important part. So it's spending more time asking questions that matter and asking a wide range of stakeholders the questions that matter. And eventually what you'll see is as you do this better, you get greater convergence between your approach, your strategic approach and your outcomes focus, and you're going to get much better and more effective social impact overall. So this is what I think is the main game. A few examples from the field and projects that I've personally been involved with recently in this space that I think will hopefully illustrate part of the integration of strategy and social impact and the gradual convergence. So imagine that you're a small not-for-profit in southeast Victoria. Eventually someone's going to get it. And you've got no clear youth strategy, but an opportunity comes up near your head office to open up a youth facility where you can transition your youth services to start to provide really good quality care, perhaps wraparound care, to those clients. And so this comes up, the CEO pitches this to the board, and what happens? Well, the board may be a bit of back and forth. You need some parameters, you need some framing around this. So where's the first place you look? The strategic plan. So in this example, this organisation had a strategic plan that had a clear priority around client impact. So doing whatever the organisation can to maximise impact and outcomes for clients. And so thinking very deeply about this and how it ties into strategy, there wasn't a lot of thinking around outcomes at the time, but there's an entrepreneurial strategic opportunity for change. So what the organisation decided to do, and it was part of its process happening in parallel, was to go ahead with the process, but in doing so, appointed La Trobe University and Burnet Institute to conduct a study of what is the best quality, what is wraparound care, first of all, and then what is the best version of wraparound care for the organisation and its clients at the Youth Hub. So it's being very evidence-based in the face of uncertainty is very important, and then understanding how that evidence can help you to get better answers from your clients who are using the service. So this has led to some great opportunities to survey clients around things that they'd never been asked before. This organisation has been around for over 40 years. No one has taken the time to ask youth clients, what do they go to the service for? What do they want? When they're not going to the youth service at this organisation, where else are they going? So simply getting the insights around why are you choosing to go to Centrelink and Headspace? If we had those guys in the Youth Hub, would you attend? Has really radically changed our design, our program design and our service delivery, and I think it's optimised how we're looking at client outcomes, and it's changed our strategy here. So this is pushed ahead. We're now working with Medibank to sort of refine partnerships and a model that will help us to deliver the most services in the wraparound context. And I think this has been a big success because it's a case of where a clear focus on client impact and social impact has driven strategy and not the other way around. So maybe worth contemplating a little bit about measurement because often social impact is about measurement. So not everything worthwhile can be measured and not everything that can be measured is worthwhile. It's something I constantly think about and perhaps even ruminate on in my work. We've got so much data now. You know, it's the age of big data. It's everywhere in our systems. Any new system is going to give you a raft of data. But what data matters? What's most important for the client journey? What is the key value generating elements of your data set that matter for clients? And how are you sure that you're measuring what really matters is the real question here. So I think if you can get the focus right here, and it's not about all the data, it's about the data that really makes a difference in the journey of the client. And if you come back to things like change narrative, or you do some journey mapping or some storyboarding with clients, you'll begin to identify what are the key data points that you need to really be measuring intentionally, rather than just because it's there. Another one of my favourite examples and clients I've worked with is called the Power of Engineering. And they do terrific work solving a problem that probably not enough people are making noise about. Only 13% of Australian STEM workers are female, and there's really not enough girls and women studying STEM and maths and engineering to get those numbers up to make a significant difference. So the team at Power of Engineering said, we want to solve this problem. And what we're going to do is we're going to be really evidence-based about it. We want to commission a What Works review. And a What Works review is where we say, it's like a literature review really, but in consultant speak. You want to say, what is the global bulk of best practice telling us about what works in this space? What are we doing that we shouldn't be doing? And what are we not doing that we should be doing? So it's like you have your literature review, you have your practice internationally and locally, and then it's a bit of a gaps or sort of Venn diagram type analysis where you figure out what you could be doing to really enhance program quality that you're not doing. And actually in doing this, some amazing insights came out around what's happening in the UK and the US, around who are the types of girls and women that really benefit from these programs, and who are they demographically also. So what some of the literature suggested is that when girls are deciding, making these life-changing decisions about who their heroes are and what they want to do, these are decisions that are happening probably in middle school or early high school. But what we discovered was happening with Power of Engineering is they were running the bulk of their programs in Year 10. So what's your problem there? Most girls have already decided what they're going to do subject selection-wise by the time you get there. And this is by virtue of doing this program logic workshop, this theory of change workshop, and combining the evidence that we were able to have it was literally a cup dropping moment. One of the girls dropped their coffee cup and sort of said, this changes everything. Well, it's those realizations and insights that are the difference between a good not-for-profit and social enterprise succeeding or not. Knowing who your client is, what they need, and how do you help them on that journey. And I think a lot of this is about just asking the right questions. And I'll talk more about that later. But how do we make sure we're continually asking the right questions? A theory of change workshop. Can I just get a show of hands? Who knows what a theory of change is or program logic? Okay, so very good audience, very literate audience. I won't explain that, but basically what we did in this setting was just get everyone together, the team. We had a volunteer there, so that's one of the clients or beneficiaries as well. And you literally just stand with post-it notes at varying sizes and say, what do we think is our impact, and how does the sausage machine work? So all the way from what goes in, what are our inputs, dollars, resources, and whatnot. What is the activities that we're running, or the programs? What are the short-term, long-term outcomes, and what's the impact overall? And it's really, this is something that anyone can do. It should be guided and facilitated. The girls on their own were able to get some incredible insights. And this is them hard at it, really putting up the notes to explain the process and coming to those realizations themselves. So this was powerful. It led to insights and it led to social change. And now their programs are far more targeted and effective and create a greater social impact. Yes, so I probably covered most of that, but just the combination of the what works, the evidence search, and the theory of change workshop lead to a shift, and the organisation's able to really capitalise on that and go forward with the knowledge of what it's doing is successful and works. And when this was pre-measurement when we were doing this work, there were surveys in the works already, but when you're designing a program and you get terrible data. So the insights around this process, the discovery and the potential for change to make sure your program is smart and works well is infinitely valuable. At the end of the day, an organisation that partners with big universities, some big consulting companies, some top 4, Telstra, or Qantas, so they need good data that accurately reflects a successful working program, and that's where we were able to get to. So a question that I'm often asked is, tell me why it's important to do social impact work, or what's the point? And so this is what I see as, across the categories, the key benefits of engaging in social impact work and doing this for your organisation. The first one is fairly obvious. Most people, most organisations, I think, embark on a social impact and strategy journey to win more grants, tenders, get more government funding, meet philanthropic criteria, to have more success in winning funds, competitive applications. But where I see this really coming into its own and generating great value is around people. So the people in your organisation understanding the strategy better and why you're doing what you do, and connecting the daily activities of the organisation to social impact. And we know that particularly with young workforces, purpose in work is a key driver and is going to lead to a lot more of a productive and engaged team. So critical to get that right. It also means you've got an easier story to tell. It's far easier to understand what's happening in the organisation, why it's created change, why it's successful. This should lead to better culture, and we know storytelling is the bedrock of good culture. So very important to have that happening. An understated part of this process is really powerful, is client empowerment and buy-in. So if you get your clients along to theory of change workshops or get them to come in and do storytelling, you're going to have them really understand that you care about their journey, not just that you tell them what their journey is. Rather, having your clients in as an active participant in shaping impact and strategy is key. And we've seen this work really well, actually at the first example, Task Force Community Agency. They invite in clients who have been suffering for a long time from alcohol and drug dependency at their all-staff days to give talks at the end of each all-staff day about their journey, so you understand it. And the same people who are doing that are involved in our theory of change mapping, and also in a lot of the taking their insights to survey and helping us to construct better programs. Finally, for community, well, collaboration for impact and collaborating around creating a social impact is really becoming the way to go. And so visibility and transparency around how you're creating social change is becoming more and more valuable. And you're just not able to do that if you can't tell a clear story from beginning to end about the activities that you do and the change that it creates. So it's vital to attract the right partners and the right perception in community that you get on the front foot and have accountability and transparency in the way you do impact and the way you do strategy. It'll embolden how you convey your strategy also. So I've been an active Movember participant for about 9 years, and they're not a client. This is a different sort of story. I think I first connected with Movember because I was just very fortunate to be able to grow good facial hair and thought, oh, I can definitely be a part of this sort of movement. This is my bag. At the time, they were giving away free grilled burgers for people who were doing it, so that was another big tick, get some lunch. But to see what they were doing and the impact they were having around men's health and how they focused in on specific areas and didn't have a scattergun approach. They're a really clear model, a really clear vision or purpose, and a really clear strategy to create social impact. And so I think, for me, they're one of the best examples of how they engage community effectively around a cause, because it's so simple that it's easy to buy in, and it's easy for people who like Movember to have conversations, see each other, and form a strong bond around the cause and the organisation. Movember might not know about me, but it's been an integral part of my life for 9 years. That's real community connection. Each year in Movember, myself and a good friend who also does Movember, we discovered that we were both doing it. We partnered up and we do a podcast around men's health and wellbeing every year to mark the occasion. And he's got a personal story around his struggle with mental health, and he's got a relative who passed away because of some significant mental health issues. Myself, many relatives and family members, and my own story, and it's so important to really get together around things that matter like that and to speak up and to sort of be heard around that issue. So we do that every year, and part of the reason I do that, because I'm a bit of a sucker for numbers and impact, is I can connect my own activity and what I do very clearly with the mission of the organisation. So by 2030, we'll reduce the number of men dying prematurely by 25%. That's inherently something I support and can clearly connect to. So the power of numbers and clear social impact strategy to evoke action from community. So how do we really bring some of the disparate concepts together of impact and strategy? I'll talk a bit about, in practice, what you can do to start to do some of this in your own organisation. Because I think today we've spoken about some lovely ideas that may at times seem intangible and esoteric, but it's nothing unless there's doing attached to it. So we'll get a bit practical. So a few things you can do. Clearly, I've made the case today about tapping into client voice and really engaging your clients and hearing what they have to say about the journey, how you do impact and how you do change. When you think about funders and what they want, all too often, you're going to end up in a position where you've got your strategy in place, you do what you do, and then a grant comes up, or an application, or a government opportunity to pitch for funding. Well, if you were thinking from the funder's perspective for at least part of your time every day from the outset of your strategic planning and how you do your everyday work, you're going to be well prepared. It's going to be part of everyday business, and you'll understand the funder a lot better rather than just rocking up when it's grant time and scrambling. And integral to that is understanding outcomes and how they're part of your planning process. So very much around the Seneca analogy, what is the port that you wish to arrive to, and what does that look like? So start to make it tangible. I mean, if you want to arrive at the port, what do your clients look like when you get to the port? Start to make the intangible tangible. What kind of changes in health and well-being do you want to see, do you aspire to see, and do you expect to see as part of that process? One thing that I've learned is that the conversations you can have around social impact at work are critical. In a number of clients I've worked with, there hadn't been enough of that at the start. So it just looks like there's something happening at board or executive level or consultant level where there's some impact strategy. But if it's not connected to your people who are running your services on a day-to-day, it's falling on deaf ears and it's not going to work. So how do you make social impact part of an everyday conversation? Well, there's meetings, having an allocated agenda item where it's something that comes up in team meetings. There's CEO messages where they get sent out and there's a bit of talk about what's happening with the impact strategy. Myself, in a number of clients, I will go to meetings and just talk about what's happening with social impact until I get some champions who put their hands up and say, I like what you're doing and I want to be part of it. So a very effective way to make this happen is find the champions of change in your organisation who care about this, because they're there and they're waiting, they just haven't heard the conversation happening yet. So make the conversation public and see who turns up with the spirit and the goodwill to actually implement or take some responsibility in the process. So at Amazon, Jeff Bezos has a thing that he does where every meeting he leaves a chair vacant, and that's the client's chair. So whenever a strategic matter comes up or a decision to be made, they look to the chair, and Bezos, not sure if he would attend those meetings anymore, but whoever's leading the meeting would say, what would the client say about this decision? So I think it's a very visible gesture of having the client front and center of mind, even when they're not there. And to be honest, I think we can do one better. I mean, why not bring the client or the beneficiary along to some of your meetings, your strategic planning days, your stakeholder meetings, some of your bigger events where their input can be heard, they can be understood, and they can be part of your process. And that's getting a bit closer to a true co-design rather than a last-minute consultation. AGQI, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it because I made it up a few weeks ago, but ask good questions early. So I think critical. Albert Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and his life depended on it, 55 minutes of that are going into asking the right questions and only 5 minutes to the solution. Now, how many times have you seen it done where instead of doing that, you get in a room and everyone just tries to come up with the best solution, and it's a fight for space, it's a fight for commanding the floor. You're starting in the wrong place. You're not asking the right questions. So in a meeting like that, that's a decision-making meeting or a strategy planning session, you should be really jostling for who can ask the most on-point question that's going to add the most value to the conversation. So I say, ask good questions though. So not all questions are good questions, so you should try and focus in on the topic and really be clear about what the parameters of the conversation are, but really spend more time on that because that's where the value is to be had. And with all of this, social impact and strategy, it's all about asking good questions. So I try and keep this one close to mind. So I think if you do this really well, where you're going to get to or where you should end up is you're going to have really good program quality that's going to be far more effective, and you should see better impact and outcomes from all your work. And that's the name of the game. I think the program quality one is what surprises people. They sort of see social impact as a static, let's just measure what's already been done. Well, you've got to think of it more as, let's see what we can do better. Don't stop with the measurement approach of the old school and just say, this is what we did, we'll try harder next year. Use it as a strategic planning tool to make all your programs and your strategy better. Look forward with this, not back. So how does all of this really overlay and assimilate to one concept? Well, I just want to give you some examples of what I think is best practice in this space and what I think will be increasingly part of our own landscape. So I think, firstly, Give Directly is a charity I've been supporting for a number of years. What impressed me is that they've come out of, I think it's Boston or MIT, one of the innovation labs in the States, and they had a really clear approach to impact and strategy, and that was simply to say, our strategy is to have as meaningful and biggest impact that we possibly can. We're going to do that with research, the best scientists, numbers, and knowing what works. And so that's what they've done. They run rigorous trials, randomised controlled trials around most of the interventions they run as the gold standard. And in this particular case, it's sending money directly to the extreme poor. There's a lot of negative research about that topic in the past decade or two, and a lot of people saying things like it's just going to be spent on booze or it's not really productive. But with the power of data and RCTs, they were able to show that it's actually one of the most effective ways globally to get a poor community or a family in a community out of poverty and into the middle class eventually. So they are really clear about what $1,000 does if you put your money towards them, and I love that. I can understand what it can do across a number of domains, and it's evidence-based. It ticks a lot of the boxes in terms of clarity of impact, and it's so simple. So I think for me, this is something we can all think about as a way to really get those two concepts converged. Two other innovations in the space that excite me. One will be discussed tomorrow. I think there's a blockchain for impact session. But blockchain is essentially a distributed ledger, no need for an intermediary, that can verify whether transactions have happened. So think of it as a precision tool to enable you to know that impact has occurred, and when that impact has occurred, a contract is ticked off and transactions are made with funding and whatnot. So there's a trial going on right now, and it's partnered Social Suite, who are an IT company out of Melbourne. with YGAP, who are an interesting group who are doing some great work with youth globally and youth programs. And that program is around, is what YGAP is doing with a particular program effective? So if it is effective in producing the impact that it says it does, then the smart contract is ticked and the funding for that program is released. So this is really exciting. This is a case where there's contemporaneity. The thing that you say you're going to do can now be proven. In a world of intangibles, that's very valuable. I think where impact is heading, it's really about being able to show in real time and with numbers that what you said you were going to do is what you did, and here are the outcomes. And all that takes is agreement on outcomes and impact before it happens, and you're off. So that's very exciting. The second one is around access to social impact as a tool for change, for management strategy and for measuring outcomes. So the Australian Social Value Bank has been around for about a year or two. It's been fairly low key, but they're doing some amazing work in opening up a big data set or set of what we call well-being values. So that, for example, if you want to know what the social benefit or the dollar improvement or value is of somebody who quit smoking as a result of your program, you can look that up. If you want to know what is the social change or the value of somebody who gets care for type 1 diabetes on time, you can look that up. And why this is such a powerful change is because for the first time, we can measure apples and oranges against each other. In the world of social return on investment and impact, often one of the big critiques has been, you can't compare those programs, they're totally different. Well, using this system and making both things, we'll call them pomegranates, you can compare them and you can actually say which one is better for your organisation to do. So imagine the strategic power that unlocks for you. You can compare your programs using this tool online and decide, yes, we are much better off building the youth hub, or maybe we'll buy a residential care facility to serve some of our longer staying clients. So that's very powerful, and I think that will really enhance access. So some key messages to wrap up. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. Social impact it's a journey, it's not a destination. So it's very much the layer cake number 2, not cake number 1. You've got to think of it as an ongoing process. It's something that looks forward and not just back, and it's definitely not something you should leave to the last minute. It's something that should be ever present in your strategic planning. You need to be thinking about quality measures and qualitative measures as well being more important than just quantity and quantitative. So don't get caught up in program volume discussions around doing more is doing better. Show that what you're doing and what you plan to do is going to be even better than what you're currently doing with changes in well-being, impact and outcomes. Perspective taking from clients and funders. I didn't mention this exercise, but something that's quite useful in addition to having more of your clients and funders around to inform your strategy is to use a tool called De Bono's hats. Has anyone heard of De Bono's hats? You pop your hand up? Yep, great, so well known. Basically different people pop on different hats and play different roles in a meeting. And one useful exercise that I've done before with clients is saying, okay, you're the funder of your own program this time, be the government funder, you're the client, and let's see what can come out of this session. So the more you can take in diverse stakeholder perspectives earlier in your planning, the better your program quality will be and the greater your social impact. So that's key. And finally, if there's one last sort of call to action, use social impact as something that can elevate and drive strategy to be better. Don't see them as competing interests. They're definitely not. Social impact is there to help you ask the right questions, to drive the right insights, and to help you to do what is really a change process that will help all your stakeholders more better on an ongoing basis. So with that, I'll close and invite any questions. Thank you. I'll come down for these, so give me 1 second.
Thanks, that was really good, especially the last bit about the blockchain. Can I get some clarification on, you're talking about the well-being values and that you can compare quit smoking program with, let's say, diabetes program or early prevention program. Where can I find out more about that and how can we get involved? That's
yes, so you can go to ASVB, just Google ASVB, the Australian Social Value Bank, ASVB. And what you'll find there is a set of 62 values that you have to pay for. I don't think it's too much, but they will essentially give you what those dollar wellbeing values are for both primary and secondary outcomes. So primary is what happens with a client. Secondary is what happens with other things like tax savings or related stakeholder outcomes.
If you want to get involved more with the use of blockchain in real life, what do you recommend people do?
I would email Social Suite and just say that you've seen this talk or you've heard about this and you want to be more involved. I think it's in its early stages. We're at trial stage at the moment. Very promising technology, but need more evidence that it works well and is affordable.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's very interesting. We received some funding from the Department for Human Services, state government, and also federal government Department for Industry and Skills. Their reporting uses results-based accountability model. Have you had much involvement with that and how that fits with your social impact? Is it like, for me, it does measure the social impact. But
it's a known tool for impact measurement. It's not one I've used personally, so I can't speak to how good it is or how it works per se, but I am familiar with it. In my own work, I've used a combination of tools. Mainly theory of change has been a very effective entry-level way to, so understand what the journey is and then pick out the data points from that, pick the right system and help you, figure out what you need to spit out the other end outcomes-wise. So integrated approaches, I think, work well.
If you're linking your social impact measurement then with your strategies, do you do anything in particular to kind of mitigate against the risks of if you have impacts but you can't measure them? Like, I know that you can still do them qualitatively, but I think there's a tendency to weight more heavily the things that can be quantified.
Yes. So we're hitting the tricky territory there of do you try and measure the things that are really hard to measure if they're too hard, or should you just measure things that make you look better? And it's not a pretty answer. I mean, it depends what the organisation wants to do. I think you can make reasonable efforts to measure anything, and you should. And I think if you really want to work at measuring something that's hard to measure, probably means that it's worthwhile to the organisation overall. The fact that it's hard often means it's worthwhile doing. It's just going to take longer. So what I'd be doing in that situation is building a long-term plan towards quantifying that to some degree, but you have to work in the meantime with what you've got to make the case that the measurement is effective and useful. So I think you can attack it both ways. Yeah, but definitely worthwhile still measuring things that are hard to do. It just takes more time and longer-term planning.
I've heard it discussed before sometimes that a certain amount of program budget should be spent on investing in social impact and outcomes evaluation, etc. Have you got any recommendations on that? I know they talk about generally most programs use less than 1% of their overall budgets, and it's recommended that we perhaps should ideally be investing in it to around 5%. Could you speak to that at all?
The big trend I've seen in this space is government moving away from funding measurement and evaluation. So they don't want to touch it anymore. They want to push it onto the sector. Yeah. And so I think that is something that the sector will have to come to terms with a little bit about how it funds that. I will say that what's worked really well for me with a lot of my clients and bigger and smaller clients is showing that doing the social impact measurement is valuable to the strategy and the organisation more generally. So that's a good way to show that it's worthwhile doing. It's not just important for your stakeholders, but showing some of the returns that are there to be had for the workforce, for management, for the community from doing that work will help. And even making the case around how you can actually, if you have a clear social impact measurement approach and you're doing it, well, think about all the opportunities that you're going to have to really put your best foot forward for grants, funding, and competitive tenders. Yeah.
Mike. Sorry.
Thanks, Mike. I just, my first degree was in mathematics, so I have to sort of ask what range of values you might be thinking of in answers. So do you find people don't do impact measurement because they're afraid that their answer might be very small or even negative sometimes?
Yeah, I think there's that. Thanks for your question. I think a bit of it is around being fearful of knowing what works, but whether you're doing that or not. So a lot of the time, it doesn't start at the numbers for me. It's sort of like, how did you decide that you'd design your program this way? And often it's just it's just how we do things. So there hasn't been a lot of thought going into that. Now that's okay, but I think a commitment to positive change and getting better is also a commitment to humility and honesty in front of the sort of scientific process, and being open to being clear about how you do things now and how you should do things. I think with numbers, what I have seen is that you might not always start that well, but you get a baseline and then you see how you track against that baseline after year one. So I think anyone who's doing impact measurement, and many boards do this, they'll say, we'll invest in impact measurement, but just to see how we go in the first year and to see if we've got really great results. Well, that's a bit foolish, because year one is the year when you get your baseline, so you know how you're going against yourself and benchmarked. And then after that is where you get the insights around whether you're being effective or not. So the hard thing with this is it's a long sell. It's not a 1 year thing. It's probably a 2 to 3 year thing if it's going to work well.
So just one follow-up on that. I spent some time looking at various aspects of organizational development and the rest, and I just wonder, I think that in complex environment, benchmarking is pretty much a big waste of time, that we're looking over our shoulder at where everybody else is, rather than playing to our own strengths. And does impact measurement then actually give you an effective means for benchmarking against your industry or other players? Does it become meaningful in that context to benchmark? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's all about what you choose to measure and how you want to do it. So there's a range of methodologies you might look at and how you measure your own impact. Some organisations will want to do it in a way that they can't compare it to other organisations, because then it's just a great big number. So that's done quite often. You don't see a lot of organisations doing it so that they can benchmark strategically. That would be better. But I think we're seeing more groups that come together now and want to maybe do a combined investment in impact measurement across their organisations would be a really smart way to have that intelligence. In Victoria, where I'm from, we just had a change from drug and alcohol systems measurement from a really old system that was built in the 80s to one that was finalised very recently. And so there was a lot of thinking around, would organisations come together to fund a joint approach to benchmarking and evaluation? And as often happens with this, there's a lot of excitement, and then the answer was just, nah, it's too hard, because that's not something government designed for either. So it's a bit. I think it's a bit about initiative and how much commitment you have to that sort of sectoral overview. Great, thank you very much.